Hello friends, today's topic of discussion is Indian cinema, emergence of the studio system. As we are aware, since the beginning of the Indian cinema in India, we find that how over a period of time we find that the star system emerged, and in the initial part when we see, then we see that the studio system was the dominant norm, where studios, big studios, they were being built by some of the producers and directors, and these studios, they were producing a number of films. The people, those who were associated with these films, they were working in the studio system, where they were on the regular payroll of the studio system. And we find that during 1940s, when the arrival of the black money takes place during the Second World War, we find that studio system gave way to the star system. And similarly nowadays, even we find that how film stars, heroes and heroines, both of them, they command a lot of money in the market, and the people, those who are there in the film industry, once they get the nod of the bigger or the big film star, then the film takes off. So the financiers, the producers, all of them, they turn up once there is some kind of a consent by the hero and the heroine. Largely in the Indian context, it is more of a hero, because many of the films are hero-centric, and how women, they are not accorded that kind of a status many times in the films. That has also been talked about by some of the critics of the films. So we see that how in the initial part, when Dada Saheb Phalke made Raja Harishchandra, and this film was made through Phalke Films, and we find that over a period of time, a number of studios, they were being established by some of the filmmakers, producers, financiers, and these studios, they were providing employment to so many film heroes, heroines and technicians. In that context, if one can refer to the readings, Popular Culture, Unit 13, Indian Cinema by IGNOU, then Feroz Rangoonwala, 75 Years of Indian Cinema, then Vyas Thorawal, Cinemas of India, 1896 to 2000, Gautam Kaul Cinema and Indian Freedom Struggle, and Aruna Vasudev, Liberty and License in Indian Cinema. So these are some of the readings which one can refer when one is talking about the initial cinema and the kind of changes which happened in the initial cinema. And it is also an important aspect that since the arrival of the cinematograph in France by Lumiere brothers, we find that in India also, I think within a span of around 7 months, the cinema gave its presence when the representative of Lumiere brothers, they presented the first cinematograph show at the Watson's Hotel in Bombay in the Kala Ghoda area. And we find that the first short film was produced in 1907, and as we are aware that the first feature film Raja Harishchandra was produced in 1913. Feroz Rangoonwala has also talked about the Pundalik. Pundalik was a film which was made in 1912, and we only have advertisements of this film. We do not have the reels of this film. And it is being reported that some kind of a stage play was recorded by R.G. Tornay. And we find that how some of the initial filmmakers, how they shaped the entry of cinema in India. Harishchandra Sakharam Bhattavatekar and Hiralal Sen, who were the first to make short films in 1897 and 1899, and how they were trying to capture the live theatrical performances in the film. And we also see how F.B. Thanawala from Mumbai also made a few short films like A Splendid View of Bombay and Taboot Procession in 1900. So these kinds of initial films, the way they were being shot by some of the pioneers of Indian cinema, and because of their initiation, we find that the later directors and makers of the film, they also made some kind of a foray into the Hindi films or the silent films of those times, because till 1931 we have the silent cinema. And we find that how these films, in a way, they were trying to document various events, and if they would have survived, because many of them, they did not survive because of the poor upkeep and the apathy of the colonial rule, which was not interested in terms of establishing various archives for the preservation of the films in India. So we see that many of them, they were lost, and some of them, even if they were recovered, we find that they were not complete in that sense. So they would have been they would have provided some kind of they would have been cinematic representative of those times with great historical value. So we see that such kind of an apathy by the British in the during the colonial period was also responsible that we did not have institutions like Film Archives and Film and Television of Institute of India, which was established in 1960s. So we find that main center for these production companies was largely in Bombay, Mumbai, and we also find film studios in Calcutta, Kolkata and Madras, Chennai. And SJF Madan, he launched a bioscope show in a tent in 1902, and he expanded into theatres and later film production as well. And we see that when Madan died in 1923, he had around 50 film theatres. So how these films, they were to be screened, that was an important aspect. And when businessmen and filmmakers, they came together, then they realized that the establishment of the theatres was an important concern. And we see, along with being the site of the first screening of the motion picture, Bombay was also the site of one of the first films which was made in India, a wrestling match which was shot in city's hanging gardens. So in that sense, Bombay was the epicenter of the film production, and it was possible because of the infrastructural support of the Parsi theatre groups, which provided the pool of workforce to the then emerging film industry. So we find that how Parsi theatre it was being accorded as aesthetic and cultural antecedent of popular Hindi cinema, and that is how we find the ideas of melodrama or loud kind of an acting in the initial films, because that is how the Parsi theatres, they performed in India. And when we see that when these kinds of films, they were being made in India, how Raja Harishchandra was shot in Dadar in Mumbai, and title plates that were inserted in between the silent scenes were in English and in Hindi as well. So we find that prior to this, Phalke shot an instruction film, The Birth of a Pea Plant, in 1912, and this film brought forward the concept of time-lapse photography and resulted in capsule history of growth of a pea into a pea-laden plant. So when we talk about this film, that provided the financial assistance for his first feature film venture as well. So how Phalke was way ahead of so many others in terms of his ideas and conception, and this idea of time-lapse photography, which was in a way brought by him, was also in a way revolutionary in that sense. And we see that when all these kinds of films, they were being premiered at different places, beginning from Raja Harishchandra, which was premiered in Olympia Theatre, and then the screening was followed with the single print in Coronation Cinema Hall in Goregaon, Mumbai. So the people, those who were associated with business, they realized the importance of this medium, and as early as 1896, when the first films, they were being shown in the Watson Hotel in Kala Ghoda area, we realized that Times of India reported the next day that cinema will prove to be some kind of a marvel of the century. And we find that in the entire 20th century, we find that how cinema was an important component of the social and cultural life of people, and how so many people from different sectors, they also joined the film industry as well. And when we talk about the various kinds of banners, for example, the Phalke Film Company, how it remained a pioneering effort of the institutionalization of cinema in India by Dada Sahab Phalke. And we find that it was a private enterprise company and primarily a family-run business, with Phalke's family members remaining important heads of business. So initially, we find that in these kinds of films, how the people, those who were associated with the film production, they were largely from the family, and these people were the ones, those who were controlling the business aspect, as well as many of them, they also acted in the film as well. That how Dada Saheb Phalke's children, they also acted in the film as well, and how Dada Saheb Phalke doubled as, or rather tripled, or maybe multifarious kind of roles, where he was the producer, he was the director, he was also the script writer in that sense, he was the one who was cleaning the negatives, and he also went to London for these kinds of things where the films, they were to be in a way cleaned. And so he was involved in different kinds of processes which were associated with the film industry. And there was a film called Harishchandra's Chi Factory in Marathi, which was made, which tried to convey the kind of initiative which was taken by Dada Saheb Phalke in terms of film production. And we see that in 1913, 3 films they were made, and these were the silent films. And by the end of the silent era in 1934, around 1300 films they were being made. And 1931 was a year of climax for the silent films, where a total of 200 silent films they were made. And it was also the time of making of the first talkie, because the first talkie, Alamara, was made in 1931 by Ardeshi Rinani. And how Ardeshi Rinani was in a way influenced by the talkies which came from abroad, because the first talkie which came to India was it was made in 1927, and it was also screened in India later. So this kind of an inspiration, where talkies, they were being made in different other countries of the world, and then how they also made some kind of a foray into India. So we have to realize that India was under the colonial rule, and how under so many limitations and the kind of policies which were followed by the British. So it was not very easy for the Indian filmmakers to have their own way, and how the British, they were trying to throttle every kind of aspiration which was there in Indians with regard to the film industry and film as a business, because they wanted that the imperial films, like films from Britain, they should come and they should in a way be screened in India, and that is how they will be able to become popular and also get some kind of a money. So in the Indian context, they were not very much interested that the Indian films, they should have some kind of a free run in terms of their making, and they always wanted to in a way restrict them. And we find that in 1934, the last year of the silent cinema, only 7 silent films they were being made. In the context of South India, we find that R. Nataraj Mudaliar made Kichak Vadham, killing of Kichak, a character from epic Mahabharat in South India. And J.F. Madan made Satyavadi Harishchandra in Calcutta. And Baburao Painter, as you can see on the screen, a famous filmmaker and Dada Saheb Phalke's disciple, we find that he started a Maharashtrian film company, and Dada Saheb Phalke made a short film on movie making itself called How Films Are Made. So we find that since the initial times, that how films are made, it is much educative in nature. So filmmakers, they realized the educative importance of the cinema, and how their themes, they were being taken from the kind of stories which were known to them. And some of the filmmakers like Baburao Painter, they started a company as well with Dada Saheb Phalke, and we find that how some of the magazines like Bijoli, it was first published in Bengali from Calcutta, and the film Lal Damayanti was made with Italian collaboration in 1920, and this was the first Indian film which was made with foreign collaboration. And we find the melodramatic and theatrical tradition of filmmaking owed itself to Parsi theatre, which were quite popular among people when cinema made its entry. So such kind of foreign collaboration in the 1920 was itself an important aspect of that particular time. And we see that some of the Indian filmmakers like Dhiren Ganguly, who was a product of Shantiniketan, and he established the Indo-British Film Company in 1918. and he wrote and acted in famous film Bilat Ferat, which is England Returned in 1921. And it was the first of its social satires of Indian cinema, and it was a light-hearted comedy which was focusing on those Indians who are unabashedly imitated costumes, habits and lifestyles of their colonial masters. So one can say that satire itself is a part of realism too, as it mocked the existing reality. So this kind of a film was also a kind of a milestone in the Indian sense, that how the Indians, they realized that how the British, they were trying to inculcate all their ideas, their dressing pattern, their food habits, and they wanted to impose all these on the Indians. And Indians also realized that when Indians, they were trying to copy the British in all these mannerisms, dress, etc., and in terms of their language as well, so they remained some sort of a poor caricature of their own personality. So these kinds of things, they were also being communicated to the audience, and we find that how the people, those who entered the film industry, they ventured into various kinds of genres, and these kinds of genres, when these films, they were being made by the various kinds of studios, then how the studios, they definitely played an important role in the context of the individuals by paying them salary, and they were being employed on largely permanent basis, and they covered entire facets of filmmaking, from acting, technical know-how to exhibition. So we find that in 1921 such studios, they existed in India, and some of these studios were really big empires, and in the due course of time they grew in size and influence as well. So how these studios, they were able to create some kind of a mark in the Indian society, where we see that the people, those who were employed in these studios, their net worth or their value was also dependent on the popularity of the studios, and the way the studios, they were making films on various kinds of genres. Especially we find that apart from mythological, we also find that various kinds of genres of social and semi-historical, and films which were based on the literary themes, and then the stunt films or the action films, all these kinds of genres, they were being attempted by the Indian filmmakers. And we find that all these kinds of studios in different parts of India, whether Madras, Calcutta, Lahore, Bombay and Pune, in 1930s, so it was an important development in the development of a proficient Indian film industry. And we find that the people, those who were known as the studio owners, like Himanshu Rai, Devika Rani, V. Shantaram, V. Damle and S. Fatehlal, they set tune for the film production, playing an essential role in promoting the national integration as well, and how people from different religions or caste, regions, sect and social classes, they work together in various studios as well. And we find that the people, those who were associated initially with the film industry, they were being looked upon in the society, and how Dada Saheb Phalke was not able to get a woman to perform the role of Taramati, and a male, Anna Salunke, performed the role of a female in Raja Harishchandra. So we find that even the courtesans and the prostitutes, they refused to work in the films, and how over a period of time film medium expanded in that manner that now we have so many people, those who are ready to work in films, and they are so much in a way engrossed in their kind of a craft that they want to develop themselves and then become part of the film industry. So all these kinds of film studios at that point of time, they led to the growth of the proficient Indian film industry, and the stalwarts like Himanshu Rai, Devika Rani and Prabhat Studios, we find V. Shantaram, V. Damle and S. Fatehlal. And for the Bombay talkies, we had Himanshu Rai and Devika Rani, and how all these people, they made films, and these films, they became very popular. And we also see that at that point of time, high value productions, they were being done, and they were being done due to the efforts of Himanshu Rai, who also acted in the films, and they were being directed by German filmmakers like Franz Osten, who was working with a German cinematographer Emily Schoonemann. And we find that when these kinds of people, those who were not from India, those who were Germans, and how these they worked in Indian cinema as late as 1960s. And we find that how Himanshu Rai raised the money both in India as well as Germany, and also from the British film industry as well. So such kind of things which were being done in the context of the Indian cinema, where we find that this kind of a collaboration, though it was not a direct kind of a collaboration, because these filmmakers or cinematographer or director, they were there in India and they were engaged by these filmmakers in their own companies. But how these people, they were working in India and how they enriched the Indian film industry, when we find that Franz Osten was also the director for Achut Kanya, which was made in 1936. So we find that how these filmmakers, and one of the most sumptuous of these epics was the Prapanch Pash, A Throw of Dice in 1929, and how the film retells in an episode from Mahabharata about a king who is cheated of his throne, and he must struggle to win back kingdom and his love. So we find that the other two films which also survive are Prem Sannyas, which is The Light of Asia from 1925, and this debut film from the production grouping dramatized a story about the life of Buddha, and this second film was Shiraz, which told the legend of building of the Taj Mahal. So we find that such kind of productions, they were borrowing from the different fields, especially from the different countries, and they imparted an important character to these films. And we find that how people from different faiths, whether Hindus or Muslims, Sikhs and other faiths, they were working together and they were promoting national integration and communal harmony as well, and which was one of the important themes of the Indian films as well. Padosi was a film which was made by V. Shantaram in 1939, and this film was also trying to communicate this kind of an idea. And we find that how these studios like Bombay Talkies, New Theatres in Calcutta, and Prabhat Film Company in Germany, and all these, Vahini in Madras, for example, they were also responsible for the broadening choice of the screen subjects with music as a primary ingredient. So we find that music as an important component was there in all the films, even when we see that the silent cinema was there. So even during the silent cinema, we find that some of the musicians, they sat below the screen in the silent films and they tried to narrate the films to the audience. And as these kinds of themes, they were known to the audience because many of them, they were devotionals or semi-historicals or mythological, and all these themes, they were in a way, the story of these themes, they were known to the audience, and because of which we find that it became comparatively easier to understand these films. So these kinds of studios in different parts of India, whether north, south, east or west, all of them, they played an important role in the developments of the various industries, even the regional industries, in that sense that how Bengal or the Marathi film industry, both of them, they became an important centers. And similarly we find that in South India as well, a number of films, they were also being made. So with this, I'd like to end the discussion. We'll continue further in our next lecture about the studio system and its importance in the framework of the emergence of the Indian cinema. Thank you very much.